Day 482 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Jozzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, and currently Russia is sitting on more than 221,000 military personnel losses. Then when we take a look at the Russian hardware losses, so 8 tanks, 15 APVs, 23 artillery, but also 4 multiple launch rocket systems, 2 air defense systems, and even 1 chopper, which are all hardware losses which are nothing to be sneezed at. And so there's a couple of notable things to mention here. So you see that helicopter? That is actually the 4th Russian Ka-52 helicopter to be shot down in just the last 3 days alone. Then also, the fact that there's been over 1,000 liquidations in just the last 24-hour period alone is just unfathomable in some ways. And from a mathematical standpoint, figures like these are generally pretty consistent with any Ukrainian counteroffensive. And so then we'll head back to the map and we'll definitely start out in Russia again today due to the never-ending engulfing flames of the regime. This time it was at a central mechanical repair plant in Moscow that caught fire just this morning, which is problematic for Russia as it attempts to gear up towards a wartime economy where it seeks to leverage private enterprise to assist with production capacity for its war efforts in Ukraine. Then we'll head northeast of the Ukrainian map today as various Russian sources report, and Ukrainian ones for that matter, report that Crimea and Kupiansk, just pop those two up on the map, has Russian forces that are performing offensive operations right now. And perhaps Russia would be better suited to focus in its strength on the existing Ukrainian counteroffensive operations, mostly held in the south. But then again, the Russian army's North Command may well be instructed to try to keep Ukrainian forces busy on separate fronts on the north, for instance, right here as well. Then heading on down to the Bakhmut axis today, so fighting is still raging north and south of the town, but the intensity has decreased slightly in the past couple of days. Now, as you can see by the map, the AFU holds relatively recent positions here, and where possible, tries to advance. And it continues to be one of the main tasks for the Ukrainian troops here to mainly exhaust Russian reserves. But also, moving down just a little bit, the Ukrainian forces made some important advances northwest of Klishchivka, so right around here, as the AFU was able to kick out Russians from several strategic positions in the location. And it also could be noted that Ukraine is dealing with much better high ground positions, as you can see per the map, topographically speaking. Then moving down to the Avdivka axis, so the AFU managed to take up advanced positions near the small hamlet of Vesele, right along there. I'll zoom out for a bit of better context. And as you can see, it's in the blue liberated there, which actually did happen outside of 24 hours ago. But it's not the only activity in this region. In fact, separately, there were reports of increased fighting near Kamyanka, which is just southeast of the Vesele there too. So we could expect some additional changes to the benefit of the Ukrainian forces in this region as well soon. And then moving down to Marinka, so you may have already seen this footage around. It is about 48 hours old now, but it came out during my absence and I absolutely have to speak on this one. So here we have the Russian global superpower that it is. So the Russian army recently stuffed a T-55 tank with 6 tons of TNT and sent it hurtling towards AFU lines near Marinka. Or at least that was the plan. as the tank instead ran into a mine about 100 meters from the front line and was then hit by a Ukrainian RPG, causing a huge explosion with a massive shockwave as well. And so I do have a couple of questions for the Russian army. So first question, what are you using a 1950s T-55 tank for? Especially for being the second best army in the world, apparently. And then as for my second question, less jokingly, Russia, do you think this is a sustainable approach to fill up your heaviest armor vehicles, then put them in drive and send it very slowly in the direction of the enemy forces? I mean, even if that mine that it rolled over didn't exist, it would have still been hit by the RPG. That was the case anyway. I'm actually embarrassed for Russia that this is what it's come to. But I actually think I can piece together what's happened here. So the Russian army themselves have been well known, well reported to be receiving ancient tanks as up to 80 years old in age. So T-55, the T-55 starts for the manufacture year, pretty much. But to add insult to injury, these tanks are woefully under-maintained, and they're just not usable. So my guess is the Russian units on the ground tinkered with the tank to ensure that it can drive itself mostly in a straight line, thus proceeded to fill it with TNT because it's otherwise just useless hardware for them. But I mean, also, the whole situation just reeks of low morale for the Russian forces. Then somewhere else in the east, likely the Donbass here, so a Ukrainian drone dropped a munition onto a pile of Russian mines it found. And so, of course, the rest is history. But also, in a similar vein, Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone struck a Avdivka SPG right into the hatch through where the ammunition is loaded, making for a pretty hefty kaboom. Then we'll head across to the main front line of the moment, and we'll start out on the west end of it. So now, of course, we already know about the Piaty-Kutki liberation, so I'll zoom right in there for that one. But now we have several map updates to identify how that looks at the moment too. Or nearish enough to the moment, never fully up to date. And then so Russian forces tried to counterattack in this region today, but no changes were confirmed as made. Then moving across a little bit east, so just north of Robotyne, there are continuous battles taking place here for now. Now, this has been going on for the last few days at least, but we would expect the Ukrainian forces to absolutely make some continued gains on that front there in as little as the next couple of days or so. Then we'll continue to move east as Rivnopil is reported to be abandoned by Russian forces. So we'll find that one. Here it is, this location here, this salient point there. Although, as yet, not confirmed under AFU control. But it's pretty clear to see just the shape of it, the salient shape of it leads the AFU to very likely just heavily focus artillery on the point there. Then just a little bit to the southeast of here, so Staromoyska and Urozane is a place where Russian forces are giving it a red-hot go to hold on to these settlements for the moment. But we've got to ask, who is overseeing all of this Ukrainian counteroffensives, or the operations that go along with it? Well, Baby Yoda, of course, or Commander of the Armed Forces, Zaluzhny. As you can see here, he sports a military garb that includes a Baby Yoda patch on it. And so Zaluzhny notes that the enemy is trying to prevent the advance of Ukrainian units, and as such have deployed a system of fortifications with dense minefields. And this is why minefield clearing operations are so important for either side in this conflict right now, as either side seeks to make any gains. And so, for example, this footage shows you one such example of Ukrainian UR-77 mine clearer in the background, which is designed there to safely pave the way through treacherous terrain, minefield-laden terrain. And Russia doesn't perform these types of mine clearing operations anywhere near as much. Well, actually, it depends on how I label this, because Russia instead shamefully or unapologetically tend to take the World War I cannon fodder approach of an on-foot or in-vehicle approach to mine clearing operations over the past 6 months or so, which never ends well for their own Russian units. And then let's see, so just lastly, somewhere in the south here today, here we have a quick pic of some Ukrainian soldiers posing in front of a destroyed Russian BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle, which is also turretless. Then we'll head across to the Kherson Oblast, and specifically in the city itself. So on the north bank, so this is the Ukrainian-controlled side, as it continues to be shelled by Russian artillery, right as Ukrainian teams of all descriptions are trying to provide relief to the flood victims. Which is really no surprise at this point about how the Russian army continues to choose to conduct itself in the wake of the recent destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant dam. But some reports now suggest that Russian forces in this region may already be getting something of a karmic return after the Russian destruction of the nearby dam a couple of weeks ago, as Russian units south of the Dnipro River itself have reportedly been losing combat effectiveness, stricken in their very own self-created sanitation crisis of something of a cholera outbreak. And this all comes back to blowing up the dam on the 6th of June this year. Something that the Russian forces, of course, have the means, motive, and opportunity to have destroyed the dam, as it stops any meaningful Ukrainian counteroffensives at this location, and particularly well timed for Russia, given that it realized it was dealing with the Ukrainian counteroffensive operations right next door in Zaporizhzhia, and also needed to free up some resources for the front for that one too. And so on that topic, Russia has since transferred equipment and troops from the Kherson Oblast to the Zaporizhzhia front, as noted by the exiled mayor of Melitopol, who cited locals from within the city as noticing. Then moving across to some news for today, we'll start off with a bit of a hardware update or two. So French President Emmanuel Macron has just confirmed that the SAMP-T air defense systems have since been sent to and now successfully deployed in Ukraine. Just for a bit of background information on this one, the SAMP-T air defense systems is a joint project between France and Italy for the most part there. And it's very useful as it's a system that can be used to engage a wide variety of targets, including aircraft, UAVs, and even tactical ballistic missiles. And so it could actually be somewhat considered as a European analog to the US Patriot air defense system, which has been deployed already in Ukraine and has had a great deal of success there as well so far. Then as for a bit of a final hardware update, not really a great one, but we've come across some footage of the UK Challenger 2 main battle tank roaming around in Ukraine. Now, these tanks of which are extremely capable and battle-tested in the Middle East with some very top-notch armor. So whichever upcoming counteroffensive front lines we see these bad boys on, well, it will be a very interesting sight to behold indeed. Then in some other news, the Russian ruble continues to slide and devalue, and is at its lowest value in 14 months now, as Russia continues to become more and more ousted from the global markets due to international sanctions imposed on it as a direct result of invading Ukraine. And of course, the Kremlin will continue to downplay the effects of the sanctions on Russia, But it's not exactly something that can be hidden from regular Russians, as their cost of living increases and spirals, and the lack of consumer goods noticeable on store shelves within Russia just cannot be denied. Then in some other news, Igor Girkin, a military blogger and former Russian appointed defense minister of the Donbass, is still at it, posting videos being extremely critical of the Russian army's tactics and failings of the invasion into Ukraine. And so how this guy is still alive is beyond me, especially as he is one of the few who openly criticize the Russian military operations in Ukraine, which is typically a very big no-no to do in Russia. Although he is stuck somewhere in his little hidey hole in the Donbass, which does temporarily help his chances for survival for a little bit longer. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, so wives, mothers and sisters of Russian army servicemen recorded yet another one of these appeals to Putin himself. So in this video, they complained that bodies were not being evacuated from the battlefield. There were no promised payments coming through to them, and no one was helping the families of the deceased Russian military personnel. You see, the thing is here, the Russian state TV says to the country something like, "Oh, we're taking care of the families of any lost soldiers," but in reality, the opposite is all too common, if not the standard treatment. You see, the Russian government at some point had the completely compassionless idea to classify liquidated Russian soldiers as missing or deserted instead of KIA. This way, there's no additional financial burden for the Russian government in terms of deceased military personnel, family payouts, which actually in turn prolongs the war as Russia continues to fudge the numbers back at home as to how many of the Russian military service personnel have actually lost their lives due to this pointless and backfiring war they got themselves into. Then in a couple of funnies to round it all off today, guys, so recently the Kremlin and even Putin himself have been announcing that Russia has almost completed its goals of demilitarizing Ukraine. But I don't think they know what that word means, as there's actually no country that has become more militarized in recent history following an invasion by a neighboring country. I mean, not even some Russians believe this. I'm actually reminded of Prigozhin himself saying the exact opposite just a few short weeks ago. Then in a final quick funny to round it off with, so in Russia's attempt to boost the extremely low morale of its invading forces, they've again taken to band music to try and turn the tide of hopelessness and confusion that many Russian units face when transported to fight in Ukraine. And I've seen this quite a bit before now. It's just every time, just how difficult it is to get a smile out of these Russian soldiers listening to the music. Of course, never mind the smiling band members who are paid to smile and lift their spirits, as they themselves, of course, are probably actually pretty happy that they've scored this full-time job in the army over almost any other job that they could possibly get for their war in Ukraine. So that'll be it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit the like button. I really do appreciate it. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.